the M1 Garand might have won the war, but what about the secret silenced pistol used by spies, or the single-shot gun dropped from the sky in the millions? From heavy artillery to trench knives, today we are breaking down exactly how they worked. Let's start with the backbone of the infantry, rifles and carbines. M1 Garand, we kick things off with the undisputed legend. This semi-automatic 30-06 powerhouse gave the average GI a massive rate of fire advantage over Axis troops using slow bolt-action rifles. When that 8-round clip finally ran dry with its iconic ping, you knew it was time to reload and keep pushing forward. M1 Carbine. Next up, the most heavily produced small arm of the entire war. It was incredibly light, handy, and perfect for officers, medics, and support troops who didn't want the bulk of a heavy full-size rifle. Firing a smaller .30 caliber cartridge, it offered significantly more range and accuracy than a standard pistol. M1A1 Paratrooper Carbine. Moving on to the airborne variant. This specialized model featured an iconic folding wire stock, allowing paratroopers to strap it securely to their legs before jumping into Normandy. It gave airborne infantry rapid-fire capability immediately upon hitting the ground behind enemy lines. M1903A3 Springfield. Continuing down the list, we have the workhorse bolt-action rifle. It was highly accurate and ruggedly reliable, heavily used early in the war before Garand production fully caught up to demand. Even after the Garand took over, many soldiers still preferred the Springfield for its incredible long-range precision. M1903A4 Springfield Sniper. Let's shift to its lethal brother. This was the primary precision sniper rifle for the US military, entirely stripped of its iron sights and fitted with a telescopic scope. American snipers relied on this deadly weapon to take out enemy officers and machine gun nests from hundreds of yards away. M1977 Enfield. Next, a heavy hitter originally carried over from World War I. This older bolt-action rifle was brought out of deep storage and saw massive use in stateside training and crucial Lend-Lease programs. Despite its age, its 6-round capacity and excellent peep sights made it a formidable weapon on the battlefield. M1941 Chassson Rifle. Rounding out the rifles is the Johnson. Used primarily by the Marine Corps in the early Pacific Island campaigns, it featured a highly unique rotary magazine and a recoil-operated firing system. It was favored by many Marines because you could top off the magazine with individual rounds without ever opening the bolt. Submachine guns Thompson M1A1. Let's move on to the trench sweepers. Starting with the military version of the famous Tommy gun, it fired heavy .45 ACP rounds at a blistering rate, excelling in close-quarters urban combat. However, it was incredibly heavy to carry on long marches and notoriously expensive for the government to manufacture. Thompson M1928A1. Next is the earlier, more complex variant of the Thompson. You can easily spot this one by its cooling finned barrel and the fact that it could still accept the massive heavy drum magazines from the Prohibition era. While undeniably iconic, those drum magazines were prone to rattling and jamming in muddy combat conditions. M3 Grease Gun. Continuing on, the military desperately needed a cheaper alternative, so they built this stamped metal replacement. It looked exactly like a mechanic's grease tool, cost a fraction of a Thompson, and fired at a much slower rate. This slower rate of fire actually made it surprisingly easy to control during sustained fully automatic fire. M50 Reising. Up next is a weapon the Marines loved to hate. It was exceptionally accurate and lightweight on a clean firing range, making it initially very popular. But in the muddy, sandy, and brutal jungles of the Pacific Theater, its tight tolerances meant it jammed constantly, heavily frustrating frontline troops. Pistols and revolvers M1911. Shifting to sidearms, we start with the absolute king of the battlefield. Delivering 7 rounds of massive .45 caliber stopping power, it was trusted by troops to drop an enemy in a single shot. Rugged, simple, and reliable as a hammer, it is arguably the most famous military handgun in human history. Smith & Wesson Victory Model 38 Special. Moving forward, we have the standard issue revolver for Navy pilots, base security guards, and flight crews. It was issued to personnel who needed a compact, reliable survival weapon that wouldn't jam even if it sat in a holster for months. Firing the .38 special cartridge, it lacked the punch of the 1911, but made up for it in sheer dependability. Colt M19 1717 Revolver. Next up is another massive World War I relic pulled from the armories. Because the US was desperately short on 1911s early in the war, they issued these heavy revolvers to frontline troops. They were entirely unique because they fired the rimless .45 ACP pistol cartridge by using specialized metal half-moon clips to hold the rounds in the cylinder. High standard HDM, silenced. Let's look at the shadowy world of spies and secret agents. This was a highly classified, integrally suppressed .22 caliber pistol used primarily by the OSS for covert assassinations behind enemy lines. The suppressor was so incredibly effective that the mechanical click of the slide was often louder than the gunshot itself. FP-45 Liberator. Continuing to the absolute weirdest gun of the war, the Liberator was a cheap stamped metal junk gun rapidly manufactured to be dropped from planes and to occupy Europe. The psychological plan was simple. Resistance fighters would use the single-shot weapon to assassinate a Nazi at point-blank range, steal his real rifle, and throw the Liberator away in the dirt. Shotguns, Winchester Model 1897 trench gun. Let's move on to the shotguns, starting with the gun the Germans literally tried to ban as a war crime. You could hold the trigger down and rapidly pump the handle to slam fire a devastating wall of buckshot into an enemy trench. It was so terrifyingly effective in close-quarters combat that it became a feared psychological weapon. Winchester Model 12. Next is its hammerless and slightly more refined successor. It was slightly more enclosed and modern, helping keep out dirt while still allowing for that brutal slam-fire capability. This made it an absolute meat grinder in the tight, chaotic confines of the Pacific Island hopping campaigns. Ithaca 37. Continuing the shotgun list, the Ithaca brought a brilliant mechanical advantage to the muddy battlefields. It was entirely unique because it both loaded and ejected spent shells directly from the bottom of the receiver. This bottom-ejecting design was incredible at keeping thick mud, dirt, and rain completely out of the gun's internal mechanisms. Stevens 529. Up next is the rugged, incredibly reliable Stevens shotgun. Distinctly recognizable for its double-hump receiver profile, it was another slam-fire-capable pump-action weapon. It saw heavy, everyday use primarily in guarding prisoner-of-war camps, riot control, and clearing heavily fortified enemy bunkers. Machine guns, Mixine Guan 88 A2 BAR, Browning automatic rifle. Shifting gears to heavy squad firepower, we have John Browning's masterpiece. Not quite a standard rifle, and not quite a full machine gun, this 20-round 3106 beast was the beating heart of an infantry squad suppressing fire. A skilled BAR gunner could single-handedly pin down an entire enemy platoon. M1919A4 Browning. Next up, the undisputed workhorse of the American infantry. This air-cooled, belt-fed machine gun was aggressively mounted on jeeps, tanks, aircraft, and infantry tripods. It spat out reliable, sustained destruction, laying down a heavy base of fire that allowed American riflemen to safely outmaneuver the enemy. M1919A6 Browning. Continuing with the Browning family, the military desperately tried to make the A4 more portable for advancing troops. They attempted this by slapping a metal shoulder stock, a carrying handle, and a bipod directly onto the heavy barrel. While it provided mobile power, the final result was an awkwardly front-heavy weapon that soldiers found exhausting to carry. M19-117 A1 water-cooled Browning. Let's move on to the ultimate static defensive weapon. Thanks to its heavy brass water jackets surrounding the barrel, this massive gun could fire continuously for hours without melting. As long as the crew kept supplying it with fresh water and linked ammunition, it could easily hold the line against massive infantry charges. M2 HB.50 Cal Browning. Next is the undisputed king of the battlefield, affectionately known as Ma Deuce. Designed to completely rip through light armor, concrete pillboxes, and low-flying aircraft, its sheer kinetic power was unmatched. This weapon is so incredibly perfect in its design that the United States military is actively still using it in combat today. Anti-tank and light support M1A1 Bazooka. Let's move on to the dedicated tank killers. The Bazooka fundamentally changed modern infantry warfare by introducing the shoulder-fired shaped charge rocket to the battlefield. For the very first time, a single-foot soldier hiding in a ditch had the raw explosive capability to destroy a heavy German panzer. M1 Recoilless rifle, 57mm. Next, we have what is essentially a shoulder-fired artillery piece. This brilliant weapon vented the explosive blast directly out the back of the tube to completely eliminate recoil. This engineering marvel allowed two soldiers to fire a massive 57mm high-explosive shell without snapping their collarbones. M1 57mm anti-tank gun. Continuing with towed weapons, this British-designed cannon was brought in by the Americans to increase their anti-armor capabilities. It was highly effective at punching through the armor of early war Axis tanks and fortified concrete structures. However, it severely struggled against the increasingly thick frontal armor of late-war German heavy tanks. M3 37mm anti-tank gun. Up next is the earlier, much lighter towed cannon. While it was fantastic against the thinly armored Japanese light tanks in the Pacific, it quickly became obsolete in Europe. American troops learned the hard way that its small 37mm shells would literally bounce right off the heavy German Tigers and Panthers. M7 rifle grenade launcher. Moving on, this simple but effective tube clamped directly onto the muzzle of an M1 Garand. It allowed infantrymen to use special blank cartridges to lob high-explosive grenades much further than they could ever physically throw them. It essentially gave every rifle squad their own pocket-sized mortar for attacking fortified windows and trenches. Mk2 pineapple grenade. Shifting to explosives, we start with the absolute icon of American infantry gear. Heavy, cast iron, and devastatingly deadly, the textured fragmentation body gave it its famous fruit-based nickname. Every single GI knew the heavy feel of the pineapple grenade and relied on it to clear out entrenched enemies. M15 white phosphorus grenade. Next is the terrifying chemical weapon troop simply called Willie P. Upon detonation, it created an instant, blinding white smoke screen while showering the immediate area with burning chemical fragments. This chemical fire was a nightmare for the enemy because it could not be easily extinguished by water or dirt. M1 anti-tank mine. Continuing on to defensive explosives, this heavy steel disc was buried shallowly in the dirt across potential enemy supply routes. Packing massive amounts of high explosives, it required the heavy weight of a vehicle to actually trigger the detonator. Once activated, it had more than enough raw power to blow the steel treads right off a heavy enemy tank. Bangalore Torpedo. Let's look at specialized obstacle clearing gear. These were long, connectable metal pipes packed to the brim with high explosives, made incredibly famous during the D-Day landings. Combat engineers would violently shove them under concertina wire and detonate them to blast a perfectly clear path for infantry to run through. TNT, Satchel charge. Up next is pure, unadulterated brute force. This was essentially a canvas bag tightly stuffed with raw TNT blocks and rigged with a simple delayed fuse. It was dangerously used by brave combat engineers who would run up and throw it directly into the firing slits of enemy bunkers to utterly erase them. .3 Combat knife. Moving strictly into hand-to-hand combat, this incredibly sharp, double-edged trench knife was built for silent kills. It was specifically issued to elite paratroopers, army rangers, and soldiers equipped with weapons that couldn't mount a standard bayonet. The sleek, balanced design made it perfect for quickly neutralizing sentries in the dark. USMC Mark II K-Bar. Next is the legendary, universally recognized Marine Corps combat blade. This massive, rugged utility knife was issued to troops fighting in the harshest Pacific conditions. It proved to be just as effective at opening metal ration cans and chopping through thick jungle vines as it was in a desperate close-quarters fight. M1 Garand bayonet. Continuing with blades, this 10-inch steel spear clamped directly onto the muzzle of the Garand rifle. It effectively turned a modern semi-automatic rifle into a deadly historical pike for aggressive close-range infantry charges. The sight of a line of Americans fixing bayonets was often enough to break the morale of enemy units. M1917 Enfield bayonet. Let's not forget the massive 17-inch sword bayonet originally designed for the brutal, muddy trenches of World War I. It was brought out of storage for the Second World War and primarily affixed to the Enfield rifle and the slam-firing trench shotguns. Because of its incredible length, it gave American troops a distinct reach advantage in hand-to-hand combat. M1918 Mark I trench knife. Up next is a weapon of pure, unrestrained brutality. Another fearsome World War I holdover. This heavy knife featured solid brass knuckle dusters built directly into the grip. It was highly prized by paratroopers because it allowed them to deliver bone-crushing punches and lethal stabs in the exact same motion. M260mm. Shifting to indirect fire support, this highly portable metal tube was an absolute game-changer for moving infantry. It allowed a small, fast-moving squad to rain high explosives directly down onto enemy positions from behind the safety of a hill or wall. It flawlessly bridged the vital gap between hand grenades and heavy artillery strikes. M1 81mm mortar. Next is its much bigger, highly destructive brother. Because it fired a massively heavy shell, it required a dedicated, trained heavy weapons team to properly operate and transport its heavy baseplate. It was heavily used to completely saturate enemy strongholds and troop concentrations from miles away before an infantry assault. M2 Flamethrower. Finally, we end with arguably the most terrifying and psychologically devastating weapon of the entire war. Carrying heavy tanks of jelly gasoline strapped to their backs made operators highly visible and incredibly vulnerable targets. Despite the massive danger, it was absolutely essential for burning out deeply fortified, interconnected enemy bunker systems and caves in the Pacific. From the mass-produced grease gun to the absolute precision of the M1 Garand, this massive arsenal turned the tide of history. If you had to drop into 1944 tomorrow, which primary and secondary weapon are you picking? I'm taking the Garand in the 1911. Let me know your exact loadout in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more military history deep dives. See you in the next one.